Fueled by emotions, we feel the need to relive those emotions. And because this reliving still dwells in the emotional realm, it calls for the expression of images, which will be the real driving force. This expression of images is the imagination powered by emotions, and this imagination is always intertwined with the emotions of life. Artistic imagination is all about emotions, and bringing this imagination to life means turning real-life experiences into images. As these experiences are transformed into images, they are re-experienced, leading to the coming into existence of artistic works. These concepts are necessary in constructing a framework for explaining art. There was a British nominalist philosopher named Occam, who had a principle called Occam's razor. The philosophy of art is a theoretical framework that explains the mode of existence of art and the process of artistic creation. This theoretical framework naturally involves a large number of concepts. Do these concepts have a valid justification? We should use Occam's razor to trim them down. When discussing the mode of existence of an artwork, we start with the concept of the object. From there, we move on to the transformation from physical image to symbolic meaning. The concept of symbolic meaning then emerges. Comprehensively stating these concepts leads to the notion of a symbolic meaning cluster, which is then followed by the context of formal completeness. Are all these concepts necessary? Let's have a tangential discussion on the construction of theory. The premise is the formation of a series of concepts. If a concept can be discarded without hindering the explanation of the problem, then it is superfluous. This is the famous Occam's razor. So if we are studying a theory, be it in physics, chemistry, or economics, we should always ask ourselves, do the concepts presented in this theory have valid justification? If the problem can be explained without using a particular concept, then it can be trimmed away using Occam's razor. Let me give you an example. Back in the day, chemistry had this big concept called phlogiston. Ever heard of it? It was used to explain why some things can burn and others can't. They said that some objects can burn because they contain this thing called phlogiston, and others can't because they don't have it. It seemed to make sense, but it turned out to be all wrong. Chemistry had a bit of a revolution, led by Lavoisier, and they found out that combustion is actually an oxidation reaction. Once you understand the truth about oxidation, can the concept of phlogiston still hold up? Nope, it's just extra baggage, so they shaved it off with Occam's razor. The same goes for studying any theory. When we start discussing the existence of artworks, we have to ask ourselves, can we trim down some of these concepts? This is the thought process I went through when considering the philosophy of art, and I found that all the concepts we have covered just couldn't be shaved off. For instance, can we just get rid of the idea of object? The concept of object is super important when we're talking about how artworks exist. We can all agree that any artwork is an object, but that doesn't automatically make it art. It has to go through a transformation. That's where the concept of presentation comes in. Why do we need this presentation concept? Well, as an object, an artwork isn't something practical. You can't just take Van Gogh's old peasant shoes and wear them around. They're not objects in that sense. As an artwork, they're the presentation of the object. But just presenting the object doesn't mean it's art. Even a craftwork has a presentation. It might be really well made, but that doesn't mean it's art, so we need the concept of presentation. And an artwork isn't just a simple presentation. It's a bunch of presentations, which brings us to the concept of a group of presentations. So, what does this group of presentations mean? It means it's all about preserving and showing emotions. How do emotions come through in the imagery? It's because we've relived those emotions in our lives, forming a complete context about the artwork. We've been talking about how every artwork is like a complete package, a whole. Even though we use the word vibe, we shouldn't forget that it's still an image, something we can take in. So, every artwork gives us a certain perspective, a way of looking at things. In a way, you could say that experiencing any piece of art is like taking it all in. When we read a poem, it's like we're taking in a view. Why? Because the poem isn't just throwing a bunch of ideas at us, the words in the poem create pictures in our minds. So, reading poetry is like taking in a view in a broad sense. Listening to music might seem like it's just for our ears, but since an artwork creates its own image, we can also say we're taking in a view when it comes to a piece of music. So, when we come across an artwork, we're like the audience. What are we taking in? It's the perspective of the artwork. For example, with a painting, we might see a landscape or a flower and bird scene. So, there's a perspective, a view that we can directly see, which we call the external vision. At first glance, you can see this external vision right away. But if a work can only give us that direct view, then it's not really an artwork yet. That's why we need to bring in an important concept, internal vision. Now we're getting to the good stuff, the internal vision, kind of like what the German classical philosopher Leibniz talked about. He once said something like this: when it comes to an artwork, like a painter knows why one painting is the real deal and why another one just doesn't cut it. He feels like the not-so-great painting is missing something he can't quite put his finger on, and that's what puzzled Leibniz. Later on, one of his students, Baumgarten, wanted to put into words what couldn't be explained, so he wrote the first ever book on aesthetics called Aesthetics. Now, the discussion about artworks in the philosophy of art has reached a crucial point. It's all about why we call something an artwork, and it has something that can't be put into words. For instance, let's talk about a landscape painting. The painting shows mountains and water. The grand mountains and steep cliffs are depicted, and we can definitely talk about the painting techniques and the specific mountain that's shown. How is his way of painting mountains different from others? Take Chertau, 17th century CE, for example. He's known for his landscape paintings. How did Chertau paint the mountains in his works? You can have these discussions. But none of these discussions are about the existence of the artwork as an artwork. A painting can be really beautiful, and the mountains can be super realistic, and the external vision definitely exists. But if it's an artwork, what does it need to have? It needs to have what's guided by its external vision, the internal vision that it leads into. This is something pretty mysterious and hard to put into words. Let's take a look at a 6-character poem by Wang 11th century CE. It goes like this: amid the dark green of the willow, cicadas chirp through the rustling leaves, lotus flowers in the glow of the setting sun, intoxicating red. 36 layers of lotus ponds, we meeting again in the south, hair graying. So, does this short poem have an external vision? Yes, it does, right? And it's described very well, isn't it? In early summer, what's happening on this willow tree? It's the sound of the cicadas, the chirping of the cicadas, we can hear it. The green of the willow has turned dark, a very deep green, we call it dark green. The lotus flowers have bloomed, in the glow of the sunset. They're so red that it makes us feel intoxicated, just feeling that kind of red. Intoxicating red, 36 ponds of spring water, they are all here. The lotus ponds. One after another, the ponds are connected into a large area. There are so many of them, all spring water. Now, if this poem were only the first 3 lines, would it have an internal vision? No, it wouldn't. It's just a very vivid, realistic, and even touching description of the scenery of early summer in the south of the Yangtze River. If this poem didn't have the last line, you couldn't say it's a work of art. But because of this last line, it opens up the scene described in the previous 3 lines, the scene of early summer in the south of the Yangtze River, to a very broad internal vision. Now, think about why. Meeting in the south with white hair. White hair means old age, right? Returning to one's hometown in the south, after many years of wandering, old friends, who were once childhood and teenage companions, have all been scattered. Some went to work as officials, some went into business, or did other things. After experiencing the ups and downs of life, they are now old and have returned to their hometown, which is the south of the Yangtze River, and the scenery is still beautiful, right? But the last line, meeting again in the south, hair graying, allows me conveniently to use as an illustration, isn't it? When we look at every genuine work of art, it unfolds an internal vision, and doesn't just leave us at its external vision. In this sense, this poem illustrates the work of art. So, let's take a look at the short poem Autumn Musings. The lines, withered vines and old trees, crows in the dusk, a small bridge over flowing water by a home. The ancient road, the west wind, a thin horse, are all about the external vision. But it needs that last line, the setting sun in the west, a heartbroken person far away. So, the 3 sets of imagery in the front form a complete formal context, and within this formal context, something thematic exists. What is this thing called? Internal vision. As the Chinese saying goes, a genuine work of art is exhaustible in words but inexhaustible in meaning. It cannot be identified and measured by scientific methods, because it presents a world of emotion. Therefore, we have to use a concept called internal vision. If a work only has external vision, no matter how attractive it is in terms of aesthetic appeal, it is not a work of art. The willow leaves rustle, the cicadas in the dark green, the use of dark is so good. The setting sun, the lotus flowers in the glow of the setting sun, so red and intoxicating. The use of intoxicating is so good, right? You see. All of this can be seen as the artistic evaluation of Wang Angshi's poem. The imagery is so infectious, right? But even with so much vivid imagery, it is still not a work of art without the last sentence. It would not be a work of art, but just a very well-crafted piece. So, here's the deal. We're talking about where the objective existence of an artwork lies. It's not just in things like the perfect choice of words in a poem, or the powerful, intoxicating feeling it gives you. But hey, there has to be something more. All those things alone can't make a work of art. The objective existence of a work is when it reveals an inner vision, allowing us, the later generations, who are not Wang Angshi or his young pals, who are now older and meeting again, to relate to it. Our lives are just like that, time flies. No matter what kind of life we've been through for decades, right? Now that we're older, we go back to our hometown, the place where our childhood and youth once held our life dreams, and now we've returned. Wang Angshi summed it all up in one sentence, meeting again in the south, hair graying. So, now the previous 3 sentences all make sense. The meaning isn't just in the vivid description, but in the opening of an inner vision. We just used Wang Angshi's 6-character poem as an example. We all know that any piece of art has a picture of things outside, a kind of creation. We can judge how good a piece of work is by how skillfully it's made. For instance, we say a word like dark is used well, like in green darkness. A word like intoxicated is used well, like in red intoxication. When you're writing poetry, it's all about picking the perfect words. You have to find the most fitting word, so a real literary artist, in his language, in his mother tongue, will say every word has a unique meaning, cannot be substituted. That's a special thing. So he has to find the absolute best word. Got it? However, when we discuss a work in this way, we are actually discussing the creative techniques of the work. Through this discussion, we can talk about the aesthetic value of the work, but we have not yet discussed the existence of the work. The key to all the problems lies here. The wrong path that guides our art criticism is the continuous discussion of the creative techniques of the work, which is merely a more thorough discussion of craftsmanship. What significant meaning does this discussion have? Perhaps it is beneficial for the creator himself. For example, we can understand the art of this language, such as Chinese poetry. We have had different artistic techniques, right? Different sentence structures, rhetorical devices, and so on. These things can certainly be learned, and they are very important for experts. However, all these elements do not constitute the existence of the work, which is a very important and fundamental matter. At this point, we strictly distinguish between handicrafts and works of art. Well-crafted handicrafts certainly exist, and they also involve the application of artistic techniques. As a result, these handicrafts also bring us aesthetic value and satisfy our aesthetic taste, but the acceptance of works of art is not just a satisfaction of aesthetic taste. Just as handicrafts can satisfy our aesthetic taste, we must use a concept called internal vision to open up the internal vision. In ancient Chinese aesthetic thought, they talk about this idea of transformation of the environment. So, for example, just by the first 3 sentences, this poem is missing that transformation of the environment. It describes the scene really well, right? But that special transformation of the environment is just not there. And then, because of the last sentence, it kind of gives a feeling of sadness to all the scenes that have been described, doesn't it? It's like a sense of melancholy, a deep feeling about life, and it's hard to put into words. Basically, what we're talking about is something that Chinese literature has been exploring for a long time, including what Wang Guowei, died 1927, talked about, the mix of scenery and emotion, the blending of emotion and scenery. When you're creating an art piece, it's not enough to just have the scenery, you need to have imagery. But how do you get emotion into the imagery? That's the tricky part. Once it's in there, the scene has already changed. Just the scenery on its own is like the external vision. But if that scene carries a deep and powerful emotion, what do we call it? Internal vision. So, the concept of transformation of the environment is a big deal in Chinese aesthetic thought. So, this whole internal vision thing might sound a bit mysterious, but it's really not that mysterious. So, what was Mr. Wang Guowei really proud of? You know what he wrote, right? Discussions on the use of words. And in the world of Chinese writing theory, what was the breakthrough? He came up with this unique term. What was it? Realm. It's a word from Buddhism, believe it or not. How did this whole realm concept end up in the Chinese language? Well, it all started with reading Buddhist scriptures. Once the word realm was introduced, it was used to talk about the artistic and literary value of poetry. Wang Guowei was pretty chuffed about this, you know? Because before him, the word realm wasn't used as a fancy term to discuss the quality of artistic poetry. Before him, there was this language theorist named Chen Yanhuo, 19th century CE. What term did he use? Profound and melancholic, profound meaning not shallow, and melancholic meaning not superficial. A good poem shouldn't be shallow or superficial, it should be deep and melancholic. Later on, Wang Guowei thought that wasn't good enough, so he came up with the concept of realm. Actually, this whole realm thing is pretty much the same as internal vision. Wang Guowei used this standard to talk about and judge his discussions on lyrics, and he had to get into the nitty-gritty of specific lyric works, you know? For instance, How to compare a poem by Emperor Huizong of Song, which also expresses the pain of a fallen ruler, with a poem by Liu? The main focus is still on what? Realm. Transformation of the environment, or realm, or internal vision, all pretty much mean the same thing. When we talk about the existence or nature of artistic works, we finally get into discussing this internal vision. The realm comes in different sizes, which means the internal vision varies in size too, and this size isn't about the physical scale of the work. A short poem can have a really deep and wide internal vision, so it's got a lot of artistic value. On the flip side, a long poem might have a narrow and shallow internal vision, so its artistic value is naturally lower. So, when we talk about this internal vision concept, what does it do for us? It gives us a basic standard for judging the value of artistic works. That's why this concept is so important. We're always debating the value of artistic works, or else we wouldn't need to discuss or have things like the Nobel Prize in literature. Every work has its reason for existing, and that's okay. There's no distinction between high and low, that just doesn't fit with the history of art. No matter what, we can't really put Johann Strauss on the same level as Beethoven. Sure, Strauss made some real music, and so did Beethoven, but there's definitely a gap in quality there. I mean, Strauss's waltzes are legit musical pieces, they've got their own vibe. But let's be real, they don't have the same depth and breadth as Beethoven's stuff. You just can't compare the two. Strauss's music, though, those melodies are something else, right? They're beautiful, and they really hit you in the feels. Gotta give him credit for that. If we're talking about a musician's greatness based on the beauty of their tunes, you could even argue that Strauss is better than Beethoven. I mean, everyone loves a good Strauss waltz, right? It's a blast to hum along to. Tchaikovsky's also a melody master, his tunes are gorgeous. But then you listen to some of Brahms's work, and not all of those melodies are hitting the mark, you know? Some of it might come off as a bit dull and distant. But just because a musician creates a bunch of beautiful melodies, doesn't automatically make them the greatest musician. It's just not that simple.